Hello, everyone. Welcome to the change management skill building session. And today we're going to be talking about the change impact analysis. My name is, as everyone knows me on this team, my name is Anne-Marie Spihar, and I lead the change management practice at Kraft Heinz. And with me today will be Mark Daly. He's one of our change consultants. He works on various projects, and right now he's working on the Agile project. So he's going to be working with me to tell you a little bit about change impact analysis today. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? No?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay, oh, sorry. Okay, let me try that again. Okay, hang on. There you go. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we are good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Back. So, okay, there's an introductory slide. So really, when we're talking about change management, when we first built the change management practice, it was built about 4 years ago. Francesco Tinto brought me in to build the practice, and we came up with some guiding principles at that time. And so I think everyone's familiar with this. I've done the overall training where we need a change lead at the very beginning of stages of the project. We think about change and bring on a lead if necessary. Otherwise, the project manager is the change lead. We always want leadership sponsorship and integrate with project management. But what we're discussing today is really thinking about those impacted by the change and how to improve that end user experience. And part of that is doing a stakeholder analysis, which was our last session last quarter. This session then is about change impact, and that really helps us drive that. And some other things on the guiding principles are tracking in Project Now, the change management activities, and then aligning communications with our strategic goals, objectives, and corporate guidelines. So today, we're really going to just explain what change impact analysis is and why it is important, describe roles in the change impact assessment, and complete the change impact assessment template. We'll show you how you can do that. So the agenda discussing what is change impact analysis, why is it important, who's responsible for it, then the OCM resource approval process, which I've shared with everyone, but it doesn't hurt to go over that again, and some of you are new, so it'll be new to you as well. Then really, how do we classify the projects in relation to the change impacts, high, moderate, or low impact, and then how are change impacts identified and analyzed. We're going to do kind of a short exercise discussion, group discussion. So put your thinking hats on about where you've done change impact in the past or where you think you need it. And then we'd love to have everyone kind of chime in and discuss how they've used change impacts or can use it on their project. So really then, first of all, what is change impact analysis? It's really the systematic identification of the impact of the change on the groups or individuals as a result of the new different processes, structures, ways of working, knowledge and abilities, or tools and technology. So we're all in IT. A lot of times we're thinking about the technology, but sometimes the technology is driving process changes as well. So when we do our change impact, this is why it's such a useful tool, because it's a way to kind of capture some of that. And we're going to go into more detail into the snapshot of the template we have below, but it's not about filling out the template. It's really about giving some thought to what impacts the change is having on the organization. And then there's a link to the tool. We'll send you this presentation. So why is it important? It really helps us enable the nature and extent of the change impacts on the business to be determined. Really, we're supporting the identification of any risks and mitigations for the change. And then we're identifying stakeholder groups who will experience the greatest amount of change. So in the change impact, we describe, okay, who are the impacted audience? And then it's also between the stakeholder analysis, which we've discussed before, and the change impact. Those two are actually inputs into any change management planning. So they'd be inputs into your communication and training plans. Your stakeholder analysis and change impact should be done first. And then really it helps us identify then, what communications need to go out and what training needs to be done based upon all of that input. So it may seem like, just another form to fill out for you, but it's actually very beneficial And you really gain so much value out of doing this exercise. And you can even do this on your own, or you can do it, in a workshop with your business. But it's definitely an exercise that's worth the value of taking the time to do it because of all these really important factors of why you do change impact. So really then when we look at our change management methodology, really that change impact then is that first step in managing the change. So that's where we're first of all need to understand that scope of change. And we have, we conducted change impact assessment in demand planning, which I'm going to share. And that helps us determine our resource planning. But there's also then that next level of change impact, which is the spreadsheet we showed you, where we're going to show you kind of how you do that and really, how that'll benefit your project. And so I think everyone's familiar with the other stages, but as then you move through the life cycle of the project, it's not a one and done type of thing. You're always looking at the change impacts throughout the life cycle of the project and having that input into your stakeholder plans and really building your change plans. It's an input into that, into building any training or communications, and we really then want to bring on change champions to help us identify, sometimes the change impacts as well. And then that execution is really executing on what are those key things that are changing for people. And then also then we have that measurement of change are the key areas. So if you look at these bubbles, they all actually correspond with a level of the waterfall approach. So we have the project phases in waterfall and then the OCM phases, excuse me. And so for each of those OCM phases, there's different activities. And so as we see early on, we're performing that change impact assessment. And then the OCM deliverables are actually the tools that we have. And so that change impact assessment tool will be sharing more details with you. So any questions on any of this so far? So far, so good? Okay, I'm not going to go into great detail, but I'll send this deck out. You guys can take a look at any of the additional steps if you'd like. So also we've been using Agile a lot. So with Agile, people have been asking me, how do we do change in Agile? So I actually created this model, this KHC Agile model. This is the way we do Agile. And then this OCM methodology is down this left-hand side. Excuse me. And so the methodology actually still can be overlaid with Agile. People said, can you do change during Agile? Of course you can. It's just a little bit different, but you're still doing that change impact analysis here. And then here you're just continuing to update the change impact analysis as you're going through the different sprint cycles. So that's actually a way that, sure, there may be new requirements coming up during each sprint cycle or changes, and you're always just capturing that in that change impact analysis. Excuse me. Really for change management, who does what? So everyone is responsible for the success of the change, and a lot of you on the call are project managers and demand planners. So really then, you're owning that resource planning and then the strategy and delivery in partnership with myself, and then ensuring the active and visible sponsorship. Me and my team own the change management methodology, change management governance and Project Now. So that's where we're doing that high level change impact. And then really thinking about that change management lead resource assignment. Do we need change resources either through consulting firms or independent contractors, which I'll review that process with you. And then I really help just oversee and review OCM activities and deliverables. So, I work with a lot of the high priority projects on a regular basis, meeting with them weekly or every other week to review the deliverables. But, anytime you need that, you can contact me, and that includes the change impact. So the change manager, if there is one assigned to the project, then owns that day-to-day change management activities, developing all the change management plans and materials, and ensuring that the risks, issues, and concerns are raised, and then meeting with myself regularly to review their status. If there is not a change lead, the project manager then still will do all of these activities. So it really depends on the size of the project. Of course, if there's no end user experience, we don't have to do any of this, but small impact, you may do some of it. Moderate impact, you might want to do a lot of the change deliverables to help your project. And so when we're in demand planning, then, you're completing that change impact assessment in Project Now as a part of the demand planning process. And then we identify the resource needs aligned with your sponsor and myself. And then you present it to PRB, and I'm a part of the PRB. Normally by then, though, I've kind of reviewed the project in Project Now. I get that as a task and review all of them and then have discussions with you if necessary. And then you present that at demand disposition. So then the high level change impact that's in Project Now, this is the new version. Some changes were made at the last upgrade a few months ago. But this is really important then when you're, as the project manager or demand planner, you're completing this thoroughly, because I review this for every single project that comes through demand. And you really want to make sure you're identifying the scope of the change impact, the complexity, the process impact, functionality impact, and then we identify if it's GBS or not. So we also want to make sure, we're identifying that business impact is moderate, minimal, or high, and then what business units are impacted, as well as locations. And then is it department, is it, a zone? There's a lot of impact, questions there. And then also the number of employees impacted. So all of those questions, in addition to down below, we have some more questions just about service outage and things like that. All of these questions that are weighted, and there's an automatic calculation. It's an algorithm in the background, and then that helps identify this change assessment level. So it's very important that you fill this all out correctly. And then we have, minimal, moderate, or high, and this helps us determine if a change management lead is needed. And then that's where we have a discussion. So you can proactively set up a meeting with me to discuss, hey, I'm going to need a change resource, or, sometimes then I'll set up a meeting with you if I have any questions about, okay, what type of resources will you need? And then in addition, and then this is the high and moderate and low. So really then that high impact, that's where we really need that robust change management. And then that's where there's a large number of users, or it's very critical to the operations, it'll come up high. Moderate is really that change management is accomplished through mainly just training and communications. And then the low, usually that's accomplished by just providing knowledge, maybe job aids and awareness about the change, but there just isn't a lot of impact to the organization. So this is this algorithm in the background. It seems to be working. I always appreciate feedback if anyone feels like, oh, my project came up minimal and it's really moderate. Always useful to adjust the algorithm. So, and then in addition in Project Now, under demand assessments, there's the OCM checklist. You click on this number and that'll take you to the checklist. You take that and then I review that during demand planning. And there's a lot of questions about change, but the most important one is really this change lead criteria. So we're just determining, is it business providing the change, the project manager? Do you need an external change lead as someone internal, full-time, part-time? But this is really important. Then I need to know, is there an external change lead needed? And that's where we have a discussion. So that's all in Project Now. I think everyone's familiar with that by now. Any questions on that? Does that look familiar to everyone? Okay, good. And so really then that resourcing process. So in Project Now, sometimes, like we said, it could be the project manager, the business may provide a change lead. There historically hasn't been a lot of change leads in the business, but we're seeing more and more change people coming into the business. And so perhaps sometimes, or they have someone who may play a similar kind of role that could do some of the change. This happens a lot in HR. They'll just do it themselves. But if we do need a change resource, then work with me. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can work through a consulting partner. So on some of the really large projects, the big system implementations we're doing, we'll bring in like Infosys, IBM, Ernst & Young. So some of you work on projects with those types of resources. And so really then we determine what are those change deliverables for that RFP. So we're sending it out to a bunch of our consulting partners. Then we want to request the right level of change in that RFP to make sure they have the skill sets to deliver. So then once we determine who that consulting partner is, we'll bring them in and then make sure our SOW has the right level of change as well. Because we don't have a lot of internal change resources, we expect the consulting firms to do a lot of the change management deliverables, including the change impact and things like that. And so same with the independent contractor, I go through TAPFIN and I can help you guys bring on independent consultants or contractors and help onboard them as well. And then it's kind of something that I can help train them and really help guide them if they have any questions and help navigate the organization. Sometimes craft times can be difficult to navigate if you're a new hire or a new consultant. So any questions on any of that I just covered? So far, so good?
Yeah.
Yes, it's still there? Okay, good. Okay, great. So now we're going to have Mark, one of our change consultants. He's going to talk really then about how we identify and manage change impacts. And so, Mark, you want to take it away?
Yes, thanks very much. So yes, Mark Daly, I'm the change management lead for Project Maglev, which is implementing data cleansing and upload to Agile of all product data for international zone. And then the second phase of the project really is to make sure people are actually using and working in a new way. So that's one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, based here in Amsterdam. So yeah, so we've looked at why it's important to do change impact responsibilities. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the how of the change management, change analysis. So the first part is, as you can see here, capture the change impacts. So we're going to look at just how we do that, validate them with the key stakeholders, make sure people agree with what you've captured is what they see as the key change impacts. You can also rate them. So you can identify different change impacts by different areas, which we'll just talk about in a moment. And then that can lead to developing mitigation plans, looking at the risks and mitigations for the change impacts that you've identified. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. So, put simply, there's input, process, outputs for this change impact analysis process. So there's a number of inputs, which include things like your project charter, which obviously defines what you need to do, why you need to do it, and the scope. The solution design, again, sometimes that's at different levels of detail. The more detailed it is, the more accurately you can do a change impact analysis. In some cases, it's more a sort of a starting point. So it makes change impact analysis an ongoing thing that you have to do throughout the project. So solution design documents, obviously particular user requirements or specifications that are set. You'll use those obviously to develop a picture of the current state. So the clearer you can be about the current state, the better you can be in looking at change impacts when you compare it to the future state model. Because really that's the difference between the current and the future state. That will get you a long way towards getting the change impacts. So the process, yeah, so you review the input documents. So you can do a review of the documents and get a sort of a feel for it. Then obviously you have to engage some of the key stakeholders. So you have to work out who they are first and make sure the right people are engaged, either in interviews, discussions, or workshops. So they all have views. So I usually have a template to actually capture every meeting with each key stakeholders. I very clearly have which topic they focus on, who they are, and then I capture their inputs, and then I use that to update that main spreadsheet. So you engage them, complete the change impact analysis template. That's the one you've briefly shown. We'll have a look at that again in just a moment. That's very useful for putting everything together all into one place about these impacts. Complete the OCM assessment form. So that's particularly with a high level. That's the sort of thing you need to complete. So you get a view of who's going to actually be responsible for the managing the changes. And then you can also complete a detailed change impact analysis. And again, I usually do an initial one, a high level one, which sort of gets the key points. And then it spends much more time drilling down much further to get a more detailed analysis, the nitty-gritty parts. So the outputs, yeah, it's the assessment form, which Anne-Marie just took you through. You can get a high-level change impact at the high level. That's very useful when you engage stakeholders. You give them a sort of high level, here are the key impacts that we're thinking. And then you can do a very detailed one. If you go to the next slide, please. So it's good to think, in my view, very simply to start with of the main domains, and they are actually in the template as well. So you think of what are the impacts on the system, so tools that are going to be used, what are the impacts there? What are the impacts on the processes themselves? What needs to change in terms of workflows, responsibility matrices, permissions and approvals, things like that. What's changing will need to change or be impacted in terms of people. So the way they work, the way they will interact, organizational structure, which can mean also headcount, maybe changing some roles, maybe adding or tweaking some tasks that people would perform. Also think in terms of performance metrics that can be impacted. So what was before an important metric may not be so important, and you might need to add a new one. So the people aspects, and then of course the data. What changes will there be in the data itself and the data flow and how it's managed, and perhaps reports and the whole reporting. So again, depending on your project, you will probably you could affect all of them, but usually it's one or two of them in most cases. Can you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, we have the template. I hope you've had a chance to look at it and maybe have a go at filling it in already. It's quite useful to have because it provides a systematic approach to think through things. There is a danger of trying to include everything all at once, all the difference, and you can't distinguish between what's a minor little tweak and what is quite a big impact. So that's why I usually start with, well, let's try and look at the big picture first, look at the domains, and then you can start to go through. And this is a very useful tool, and it's also possible to add different columns as well as different rows. I tend to add a few more columns that are particularly useful. So sometimes to the left, for example, I'll add the things to do with the domains. Maybe I do one which will be to do with the streams of the project, so I can see how that stream will relate to that particular change impact. So things like that. So you can adapt that. It's for you to help you in your change impact analysis. That's what's most important, not the tool itself. So for each change impact, yeah, you can specify things like the type of impact, the current and future state benefits in relation to a particular change, the benefits and drawbacks, the stakeholders impacted. Actually, I sometimes add a whole rows, columns along the top to actually specify the impacts of particular things, because I find that sometimes easy to manage. So add that in. Yep. and then capture the change impacts, obviously through many different sources. So as you go, so it's not just usually one big workshop and it's done. You might do that for the high level to get you going, but usually it's quite an ongoing process. And of course, things happen during the project. And as you start to drill down, you will find impacts. You will uncover them as you go. That's what I usually find. So it's always useful to then bring them back onto the spreadsheet so they're not missed. So yes, you usually get a draft, and then with the draft, you sort of validate it, check it through, double check, because sometimes one impact, which some people think is really important, you'll talk to other stakeholders and they'll have quite a different perspective. So it's good to get all the different perspectives, even on the same impact.
Yeah.
Can you go to the next? Yep.
Sure. Just a real quick comment here. So back to the inputs. So sometimes people say, well, I don't know what the impacts are. So as Mark said, you can hold a workshop, or as he mentioned, and I just wanted to highlight this because it's sort of at least a way to start this is thinking about your requirements. So when you're doing your requirements gathering, those requirements a lot of times, and then your design documents will give you some of that input. And then also another thing that's really helpful is doing a current state and future state. So you do the current state process and future state process, and what is that delta between them? And that's your change impact. And so that's always useful too. Like we said, we're, a lot of us are working in technology, but sometimes you're driving process changes. So that's sometimes a useful exercise too to do with the business, is to do a current state and future state process. And that'll help drive identification of the change impact as well. So I just wanted to bring that back, that input, because that's really how you can start. And then usually then you'll have conversations with the business or your team, and then people will think about, oh, wow, this will change for the end user as well. So just kind of some pointers there. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. This is just an illustration of just some bits you sort of completed. Again, capture it as you go, and that's what I found to be quite useful. We won't go through all the different, you can look at that example a bit later, but it is good to go across the line and be quite systematic. Yeah. Can you go to the next one, please?
There you go.
So yeah, you've done a high level, then you started filling in, doing the detailed level, and then you can, go down different levels of impacts. So here, this is showing you can look at the impact of a particular change or sub change on the functions. So that one thing will impact the function slightly differently. Also in the regions, usually they have their own little way of working. So it's easy to change to this new way or new system or whatever it is. And others, it's a really big thing. So you have to capture the differences by function, differences by region, sometimes even within countries. Maybe for legal reasons, that can also be sometimes a challenge. Then also there can be differences at the site level. One site within a country might be fine with the change, and the others, they've got certain circumstances. It makes it much more challenging. Sometimes it can be to do with resources. So some region or function will have a resource in a certain thing, but another one won't have that resource at all to help. So yeah, and then the teams. So this is just an example. So when you start to collect the details, I try and make it clear, particularly when I'm engaging some of the stakeholders, how it might impact them. So if I'm talking to a regulatory team, I'll sort of sketch out a few things and check it with them or build it with them. Say your current state is this in relation to this change, whatever you're doing. The key changes will be this, which is the future state. So the future state, this is what's going to change, and the benefits. Don't leave out the benefits, so they'll know that that's part of the why and to motivate them. So quite often I build a little, I have the spreadsheet, I do some details there, then I have a sort of PowerPoints, which I use for engagements and help with validations as well. So they can focus when I'm talking regulatory team, okay, I'll talk about the regulatory ones and check it with them. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, oh, good. We're already at the exercise.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Mark's been
You're
with
welcome.
us. He's into his second year, his second project with us. He had a project last year and won this year, so we're so happy to have him on the project team. But any questions that you have for Mark before we move on to the exercise?
Good to hear you back, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Long time.
I know we don't want to let him leave. Hopefully we'll find a project for him for next year. So everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad, we're able to keep him around.
Good. Yeah. Let's hope we can keep him for next year too. I'm trying to find a spot for him. So for our project
I'm
next
sure
year.
we'll come up with something very soon.
Yes, you'll have to
Thanks
help
for
me.
that.
Sure.
Find a spot. Okay, good. Any other questions? No? Okay. Let's kind of delve into the exercise then. We really just want to talk about examples. It's great to hear from you guys. I know some of you have done this before. Some of you, it's a new skill set, or you should do more of it. I know everyone's really busy as project managers, but this is something it will reap. You will reap many rewards if you do a change impact. So, is there someone on the call who maybe has done a change impact on the project? Either they've done it as the project manager with the project team, or they've had a change lead on the project that has done the change impact that can share an example, maybe and looking at maybe talk about system, process, people, or data, and like what are some of those examples of those different areas. Does someone have an example they can share?
I mean, I can share if you need it from my old OTM project that Mark was the lead anyway.
Oh, sure.
So, an example was we had Genpact who do our load building, which means on the Europe EMEA. We implemented OTM Europe in Europe, so on the cloud. So there we had Genpact all these years manually building loads on an Excel. That's how we optimize our trucks. So that we try to build that capability in OTM, which is an Oracle product, and which means that pretty much changed fundamentally how they work, think, and interact with IT, from the systems and applications perspective. So that was a huge change, which means their life is going to change, eventually from trying to do it, think manually in an Excel, instead let the system do it. At the same time, now try to make their thought process more efficient on other things that they never got time to. So that changed their day-to-day lives fundamentally. That was one of the big ones.
And so that's the system. They went from using Excel to using the OCM system. But how did that change the processes inherently? By changing the system, a lot of times we do change processes.
So what that did was, so now we had the sites, there were emails between plants and these Genpact team, and there's another team, Control Tower. So there are three teams who are trying to make sure that the Genpact team trying to create the truckloads, and then the site making sure they're available for shipping, and then the Control Tower trying to make the carriers available. All these were manually through either email or weekly calls. So that was the process.
Wow.
Instead, what happened is this all boiled down to a dashboard wherein everybody, gets notification either through email, or they would have to log in as a day in a life process to see what the dashboard says and manage the exceptions instead of trying to plan their day. So manage the exceptions was the new way of the world for them.
Okay, good. And then how did that affect, were there people changes, role changes? How did that impact the people then on that project?
Yeah, I mean, twofold. One is obviously the whole idea is to gain more efficiency on people, the effort wise, that is where the business benefit comes from. That was one. And second, there were so many things in the back burner because they never had time, which would help improve and make things more efficient. So this freed up time for them, and then we were able to utilize those people time and effort in continuous improvements and making things even better.
Okay, good. And how did that impact the data? What was the change impact on the data then?
Oh, huge. I mean, now all these that were in Excel, and in an Excel, you can only have people look at certain volume of data, length and breadth wise, and plan ahead. Instead, now I have whole huge data dump and millions of rows, and that system is much more capable and much more predictable and much more accurate. So that was huge. So now I can plan better, and forecast better.
Great. Wow. Well, thanks, Shankar. It was such a great example. Does anyone have any questions about that for the OTM project? No questions? Okay. Thank you so much. That was actually, we couldn't have planned that better. If we were at Aon Center, I would take you out to lunch. Shankar is one of our OCM fans, so we appreciate all of your support and encouragement to have OCM on your project. So thank you. So how can you use change impact analysis to the tool to help you develop your change and project plans? So is there someone on the call that has a project right now that they're thinking, wow, I could actually probably use this? Does anyone have an example of where this could come in useful for them? Or an example that in the past, another example of how you can use the tool?
Hey, Anne-Marie, I could talk. I think Paula's on the call as well, but I could just talk about how we have been using it to help scope the work to support ServiceNow and most recently for the return to office.
Good.
As you know, and many people on the line know, Kraft Heinz is now using ServiceNow to book desk. So when people do want to go into the office, they'll have to use the ServiceNow tool. And so as we started to scope the project and the level of effort, the change impact analysis was a good data point and input for the plan, because we were able to determine the extent of the communications that we would need and how we were going to need to engage our stakeholders to let them know this is going to be the new tool that they use, and really the process was going to change, and to some extent behavior is going to change, because now people, one, they need to pre-book before they go in. They're going to need to talk with their colleagues to understand, hey, what neighborhood are you sitting in, and I want to sit next to you because we're going to collaborate on some work. And by having that, we were able to determine how many communications we needed, where we were going to partner with existing communication channels, leverage those to then communicate the changes. So it's been a good input for us, because a lot of the stuff we're doing for ServiceNow, we don't know the scope of the change until we do this work, and then we're able to say, okay, this is big or this is small. Obviously we're getting quite a range of activities to support ServiceNow.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Yeah, that's helpful. Oh, go ahead.
Apologies. And to add to what Dana is mentioning, and also what you mentioned before, the truth is the different offices also had a different current state. So it was helpful for us to understand if they were already booking spaces in some way, to understand then if it was going to be much difference or not, depending the office, and also how to adjust the pieces, not only for the communications, but for the trainings, for the different locations and the ways of working, because there were some details that were different for each location. So that was something that we could map to.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you use kind of current processes to really think about, okay, the current state versus future state, and then thinking for booking system for return to office, you know, the current state versus future state, that's your change impact, is that delta of how we were working before and how we're going to be working in the future using the booking system to reserve space. Okay, very good. All right, that was a really good example. Any questions for Dana and Paula? No? Good example. Thanks, guys, for chiming in. I appreciate that. So for some of you who have done change impacts, or you're thinking about doing change impacts, but you haven't done one yet, we've been talking about this for about 4 years, and we always talk about change impact in our overall OCM training. And I think I did a workshop a year ago for change impact. So some of you have done it, but what have you found challenging about doing it? Or if you haven't done it, what is holding you back from doing a change impact on your project? Anyone want to be brave?
I can add 2 things that I have in mind.
Okay.
The first one is, I think that although the ones that we did change management, we have clear in our mind the use of the change impact analysis. I think that sometimes for the stakeholders that we meet in order to do this assessment is sometimes hard to understand, why do we need to map this? Maybe when we are trying to understand which is the current state, that gets mistaken and people give us information related to what they're expecting in the future state. So we really have to keep all the time coming back to, we need to first understand the current state to then understand which is going, which is going to be the gap. So I think that that's something that every time that we have these conversations, we have to ensure that we map correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, understanding the current state, future versus future state. And that can be difficult at times, to really take the time to figure out what is the current state for people, really thinking about the end user and what's that future state. And, you know, and that can take some time, and sometimes you have to do a physical process map to really understand that. And, you know, we're doing systems, so it doesn't seem like that should be in the scope of our work, but it really should, you know, understanding what does that mean to the end user? What's changing for me as, you know, I will be an end user of the booking system, for example. What's going to be different for me as an end user? You have to put yourself in the end user's shoes and really then address what are those change impacts so we can address it in communications and training. Was there another comment?
Yes, and the other thing is that when we are working with agile methodology, this is something that you have to revisit all the time. So I think that's a challenge, but not of the change impact assessment, but of the agile methodology, as we already spoke in some of the meetings.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what, you know, we all get really busy. So one barrier I've heard is also like just the time, taking the time. But I can tell you, if you take the time to do this, to identify it, and then you continue to update. So as you're going through your project, you're continuing to update those change impacts, because you need to fold that into your communications and training. So especially if you're in Agile, you know, you're continuing to change, you know, the different requirements in each iteration. And so you always want to capture those change impacts. It's a way to document and understand the change, but it's good for you and the team to really do that you know, that systematic approach, because you have it documented, first of all, and secondly, it gives you the time to really think about it, and then it'll help you put that into the communication and training plans and any other change plans that you have. So it's definitely valuable. I know everyone's strapped for time as well, but this is something that it really should not take you long. You can do it as an exercise on your own with your team or with your business. You know, it's doing a full workshop. You know, bigger projects, we do big workshops for this type of thing. If you're in requirements gathering sessions, this is a time where you could even have that spreadsheet handy and fill it out. So as you're completing, you know, doing requirements, every requirement really, you know, think about, does it have an impact to the end user? Some may not, some may be behind the scenes, but even in a requirements gathering, it's good to kind of capture what are those change impacts to the end user. Any other comments about this? Questions? Does everyone feel like they, after going through this session, that they may want to do change impacts? Susie, how about you? Does this make you want to do change impacts on your new M&A projects? Is she still there? People are probably multitasking while they're listening. Any other comments or questions? No? Has this been useful?
Yeah.
It's been useful? Okay, good. Thank you for answering.
Yeah,
Sure.
and this
It's a very
little, just
important task.
It's what?
It's a very important task that we need to do, like this is an analysis. It's very important for our project.
Yeah, is this Anna talking?
No, it's Monique.
Oh, hi. Oh, hi. Nice. Thank you so much for saying that, Monique. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's really important. I mean, I know I do this for a living, so I really believe in OCM, but this task is really important on your projects, and just take the time because it will pay great rewards in the end for your project.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right. You build the Ferrari, you put so much effort, time, and money. End of the day, if you don't teach, who are going to use to drive it properly, what a waste, right? So
exactly. Yeah, we spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars on these projects. This is something that we can take the time to do to make sure we get it right for the end user. If you don't get things right for the end user, then what's the point of doing the project? We have to get that right. And this is early on in this early stages for us to identify the change impacts to the end users. This is input into all the other OCM tasks going forward, and it will really help with the success of your project in the end. So thank you for the encouragement, everyone. Okay, great. So we're wrapping up toward the end. So really then, for larger complex change projects, we recommend an OCM lead. So that's when we go through demand planning, we have those conversations, but please IM me, email me, set up a meeting on my calendar. My calendar is always up to date. If you'd like to discuss if your project needs an OCM lead or not, I'm more than happy to have that conversation and try and find a way that we can get funding for it. We're in AOP planning right now, so I'm working with all the leads to make sure we're setting aside money for some of the high change impact projects. But if there's something you feel very strongly needs change lead, we can at least have the discussion. And then for those small scale and simple change projects, the project manager can do the OCM activities. So I know as project managers, you wear a lot of hats, and some of you are not trained project managers. You work in systems and you've been given project management responsibilities. Some of you are PMPs, which they do train you in change management, but this is a skill set you should all have. OCM and change impact and stakeholder analysis, building training, communication plans. These are all skills as project managers we need to have. And so that's why I continue to do training. And if you have any questions and you want maybe to have a one-on-one session to talk about change impacts for your project, I'm more than happy to set up a meeting as well with you, just as a project manager, to kind of walk you through how do you do a change impact. If you just need guidance for your first time, I'm more than happy to sit with you for an hour, half hour, however long it takes to really talk about how to do a change impact for your project, just in case you kind of need some extra guidance. I'm more than happy to coach you on that. And then we, really using that change impact analysis template, and it's on the team site in the toolkit. So there's a change management team site, and then we have under toolkit, it's the change impact analysis template is there. But I'm also going to send it out to this group as well. I'll send you the link. But that really helps you systematically capture and analyze those change impacts. So please use the tool and any other materials on our team site. If you're not on the team site, please IM me or email me and I can make sure I add you on the site. Most people are added. Some new people, I try and add people as they join, but if you're not on it, please let me know. And then really, we're ensuring that each change impact risk is mitigated. And so this is where, we're kind of looking for things that maybe the change impact might cause a risk to your project, but you really want to have the appropriate engagement of those relevant stakeholders as well. And then each of those risks are kind of dealt with in a way that you've thought about it, like, what do I need for that change impact? Do we need communications or training? What can we do to really make sure that change impact is addressed to the end users through our change management plans, communications, and training? So that's really helps you systematically identify the change impacts, and then part of that spreadsheet is, okay, who's impacted, and then what do we need to do to help address that change impact? So any final questions before we close? Okay, has this been helpful then? Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day on a Friday. I know some of you actually in Europe, it could be quite late. So we're all busy, but just to do learning like this for OCM is so important. So thank you for being here and participating. And please, go forward on your projects. Use the change impact spreadsheet. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I have time for each and every one of you. I have time on my calendar. I'll make time. This is so important that we do this as well as other OCM tasks to make your project successful. The better we do OCM, the better off we'll be on any of our medium or large size projects. Definitely need OCM, and all of you are an important part of making that happen. So thank you for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.